A house holds memories. Its walls absorb the echoes of laughter, the weight of tears, and the profound silence left behind. But sometimes a house holds more than just the past. It holds secrets. Secrets that aren't spoken, but felt in the quiet space between two breaths, in a touch that lingers a second too long, in the heat that radiates from someone sitting too close on a sofa in the dark. Today's story is about a man named Arthur and his mother in law, Eleanor. They were two people bound together by a shared loss, living together in a house that had become far too quiet. But silence can be a dangerous thing. It creates a vacuum, a space for unnamed emotions to grow and take root. This is the story of how a house became a world and how a secret, born from whispers and averted glances, threatened to become everything. It sinks in deeper, melting away in the hot water. That sentence, the first whisper from my mother in law, Eleanor, echoes in my mind even now, years later. I'm a man in my 50s, an architect who has spent his entire life building structures that are solid, logical, and predictable. But every time I remember the sound of her voice that first night, a quiet demolition takes place inside of me. 2 years ago, I lost my wife, Clara, to an illness that moved with the slow, merciless patience of a glacier, gradually stealing her light until there was nothing left but memory. The silence she left behind wasn't peaceful. It was a physical presence. It had weight. The house we had shared for 30 years, a place I had designed and built with my own hands, no longer felt like a home. It was a museum of a life that was over. The dining table, which once hosted boisterous dinner parties and quiet Sunday breakfasts, was perpetually empty. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room, a sound I had never noticed before, now sounded like a hammer, striking an anvil in the crushing stillness. I was drowning, submerged in the emptiness of my own creation. Then one day the phone rang. The voice on the other end was as fragile as old parchment, trembling with a loneliness I recognized as a mirror of my own. "Arthur," she said, "it's me, Eleanor. I'm so sorry to bother you." It was Clara's mother, 68 years old. Her voice, which I'd always known to be so vibrant and strong, was broken. I I don't think I can live by myself anymore. She explained with a tone of defeated embarrassment that the stairs in her old colonial house had become a mountain range, that even carrying a bag of groceries up to the kitchen felt like an impossible feat. I couldn't answer right away. In my mind, I tried to construct the architecture of that life. Two people, connected only by the ghost of the woman they had both loved, coexisting under one roof. The blueprint seemed flawed, the angles all wrong. It felt foreign, almost impossible. But then, she said the one thing that shattered all my structural objections. It's just, the house is so quiet. And in that moment, a load bearing wall inside my own chest cracked open. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Come and stay here." When she moved in, the house began to change. The oppressive silence was replaced by the subtle, comforting sounds of life. The smell of coffee brewing in the morning. The gentle hum of the washing machine in the afternoon. Just having another person there, another presence moving through the rooms, made all the difference. We were two lonely ships that had been adrift in the same vast gray ocean of grief, and we had found a quiet, safe harbor in each other. We didn't talk much about Clara, or about the gaping hole she'd left in our lives. We didn't have to. We just existed together, and for a while, that was enough. But then, in the quiet hours of the night, a different kind of closeness, an unintended and unsettling intimacy began to build between us. It started so innocently it was almost imperceptible. A simple request born of the frailties of age. One evening, Eleanor emerged from her bathroom, her hand braced against the doorframe, her face flushed from the heat. "Arthur," she said, her voice laced with a gentle hesitation, "could you do me a small favor? It's a bit embarrassing, but I can't quite seem to reach my own back anymore." The first time I stood behind her in the steamy bathroom, a washcloth in my hand, I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I'd walked into the wrong room in a stranger's house. This was my wife's mother. The air was thick and heavy, not just with steam, but with an unspoken charged proximity. Thank you, she whispered, turning her head just enough for me to see her profile in the mirror. That helps so much. The smile she offered wasn't a mother's smile of gratitude. It was a woman's, a smile that held a deep, unguarded vulnerability and a relief that I had never seen on her face before. The scent of her lavender soap mingled with the steam, a fragrance I associated with Clara. Yet on Eleanor, it was somehow different, less familiar. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. It's, it's no problem, I stammered, my own voice sounding strange and distant. There was no way she didn't notice the tremor in my voice, the sudden tension in the air. As I helped her out into the cold, tiled hallway, her hand gripped my arm for balance, and her touch lingered a moment too long. She paused at her bedroom door, turned, and looked directly into my eyes. And then she said the words that redrew the blueprint of our entire world. Don't tell anyone about this, not even Mark. Mark was her son, my brother-in-law, a good man, but a bit of a worrier. That one sentence, that simple plea to keep this small, innocent act a secret, was the key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. It wasn't just an act of kindness anymore, it was ours. It was the first brick laid in the foundation of a hidden world, a world built for two. The next night and the night after that, the ritual repeated. But it was no longer innocent. The initial awkwardness had been replaced by a quiet anticipation. The bathroom became a sanctuary, a confessional. In that small private space, our defenses seemed to melt away with the steam. Could you, a little firmer? She would whisper, her voice barely audible over the sound of the running water. As I would oblige, my fingers would glide over her skin, which was surprisingly soft and smooth for her age. I could feel the knots of tension in her shoulders release under my touch. Her breathing would deepen, and in the quiet of the room, each exhale sounded like a sigh of surrender. The space between us began to change, not just at night. The invisible lines that had defined our relationship, son-in-law, mother-in-law, began to blur and dissolve. At the dinner table, our eyes would meet for a fraction of a second too long. Passing each other in the hall, there was a new awareness, an unspoken current flowing between us. The house was no longer just a shared refuge from grief. It had become the container for our secret. One morning, as I was pouring coffee, Eleanor sat at the kitchen island, the early sun filtering through the window and creating a halo around her silver-threaded hair. I love this smell, she said softly. It makes the house feel alive again. Me too, I replied. Your hands, she said, her eyes fixed on them as I set her mug down. They're so warm and strong, they remind me. She trailed off, letting the sentence hang in the air. But I knew she was remembering her husband. And I, in those moments, was remembering Clara and the feel of her hand in mine. We were filling voids for each other in ways we didn't dare acknowledge, becoming ghosts for each other's ghosts. As the days turned into nights, the anticipation would begin to build inside me, a low, steady hum. The sound of the shower starting became a signal, a quiet summons to our private world. I would find myself performing a small, silent ritual, checking the non-slip mat, placing a fresh towel and a new bar of lavender soap on the shelf. One night, as I stood outside the frosted glass of the shower door, her silhouette a soft, blurred shape moving within, she called out my name. Arthur? I'm here. Would you mind if we took our time today? She asked, her voice holding a fragile hesitation that felt like an invitation. It feels so nice. The request felt like a gentle hand stroking my own mind. The warm steam enveloped me like a blanket as I stepped inside. The only sound was the steady drip of water on the tile floor. I lathered the soap between my palms and began to gently massage her scalp, my fingertips moving in slow, deliberate circles. Oh, that's it, she breathed, her head leaning back into my hands. You're better than any hairdresser. I was careful not to use my nails, only the soft pads of my fingers. My own heartbeat seemed to fall into rhythm with the steady pulse of the water flowing into the tub. Women my age, she said dreamily, her eyes closed, her voice a low murmur. We don't get touched very much. When you're young, you crave it for one reason. But when you get older, you crave it for another. Not for passion, but for validation. Just to know you're still here, still solid. She paused, and her voice was barely a whisper. Without it, you can start to feel a little lonely, a little invisible. Her words were heavier than the hot water, but lighter than the air, and they sank deep inside me, anchoring themselves to my own profound sense of invisibility. I see you, I said, and as the words left my mouth, I was struck by their staggering, unvarnished truth. She didn't turn, but I felt her breath catch, a stillness settling over her that was more profound than the quiet of the room. After I'd rinsed the conditioner from her hair, she said, I think I'll sleep well tonight. Me too. Don't tell anyone, she repeated, and it was like she was entrusting me with the key to our secret world all over again. That night, the clock in the living room did seem to tick a little softer. The next day, Eleanor suggested we go shopping together. Just to get out of the house, she said. See the world. It was a gray, overcast autumn day. We walked through the local town square, the air crisp and smelling of rain. At a stall selling handmade scarves, she picked up a soft, teal-colored wool. Do you think this color suits me? She asked, a touch of youthful shyness in her voice that was utterly disarming. It's perfect on you, I said, and I meant it. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, and it felt like the first real hint of spring after a long, brutal winter. On the way back, we sat on a park bench. The air was cold, but a palpable warmth radiated in the space between us. Our gloved fingertips were inches apart on the cold wood of the bench. In that tiny, charged gap, I could feel the heat of her mixing with mine. I can still feel you washing my hair, she said quietly, looking down at her hands. Without thinking, my own hand moved, covering hers. The wool of her glove was soft beneath my leather one. The wind blew past, whipping leaves across the pavement, but we sat there, unmoving, in a silent comfort that was more profound than any conversation. When we got home, as Eleanor stepped into the dim light of the entryway, she turned back to me, her face partially in shadow. Tonight, she said, her voice low and steady, lock the door. That was all she said, but I understood completely. Another invisible line, thicker and more permanent this time, had just been crossed. That night, as I stepped into the bathroom and heard the soft, definitive click of the lock, the world seemed to shrink to the size of that room. The hot water ran, the mirror fogged over, and everything outside, the world, our pasts, our proper roles, ceased to exist. Thank you. Eleanor's voice was wet, and I couldn't tell if it was from the steam or from emotion. I stood behind her, the washcloth in my hand, and began the now familiar motion. The ritual had become second nature, my hands moving with a confidence that both thrilled and terrified me. When I ask you to do this, she said, her voice low and contemplative, a confession offered up to the steam-filled air. It's frightening, because it makes me feel like a woman again. I didn't know how to respond. Any words felt hollow, inadequate to the weight of her admission. It's not about going back, I finally managed to say, my own voice husky. You've always been one. A long, profound silence followed. I felt her shoulders tremble slightly beneath my hands. We didn't speak much more that night. But as we walked down the dark hallway to our separate rooms, the darkness itself seemed to pull us closer. I lay in bed for hours, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, feeling the residual warmth of the bathroom on my skin. I could swear I could feel her presence through the wall, a silent, wakeful breathing in the dark. The days that followed passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. The intimacy of the bathroom began to bleed into the daylight hours. A light touch of hands when passing the salt at dinner. A shared glance over the morning paper that lasted a second too long. We were building a world for two, brick by secret brick. One afternoon, resting on that same park bench, Eleanor began to speak of her late husband, Clara's father. He was a good man, she said, her gaze distant, but always in a hurry. Even when he would help me with my hair, it was just another task on his list to get through. She turned to me, her eyes clear and direct. You're different. You're so gentle. Her words lodged in my throat. In that moment, I wasn't his replacement or a placeholder for her daughter. She saw me, Arthur, as a separate person. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, as we washed dishes together in the kitchen, Eleanor's voice rose just above the sound of the running water. I wonder, this life of ours, how long can it last? I want it to last forever, I said, the raw honesty of it surprising even myself. Eleanor didn't reply. She just stilled her hands in the soapy water, her silence a heavier answer than any words could be. That night, at the bathroom door, she looked back at me. Lock it, she said. But this time, there was something else in her voice, an urgency, a plea, an invitation. And please, wash me. That whisper, wash me, echoed in my head, merging with the words of that first night, twisting into something new, something inescapable. As the lock clicked into place, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there was no turning back. I stepped into the steam. She was standing there, her back to me, a silhouette of profound vulnerability. Come here, she said, her voice a mere breath against the sound of the water. I took a deep, shuddering breath and picked up the washcloth. All reason, all societal norms, all the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, dissolved in the humid air. Nothing mattered but this room, this woman. My mother-in-law and me? Two souls trapped in a secret wrapped in steam. She handed me the cloth. Wash my back, she commanded softly. Her voice trembled. I nodded, though she couldn't see. I slowly moved the cloth from the elegant curve of her shoulders down to her waist. My fingers traced the paths of water droplets, drawing soft, invisible lines on her skin. Our breaths began to sync, a quiet, shared rhythm. I could feel the contours of a woman's body beneath my hands, a landscape both foreign and achingly familiar. Go, all the way, she whispered, and the words were like a spark to dry tinder. The cloth fell from my hand into the water with a soft splash. The warmth of her bare skin was a sudden, shocking heat against my palm. Her voice broke, a sound that was half protest, half plea. My restraint, already stretched to its breaking point, finally snapped. I touched the nape of her neck, where the fine silver hairs curled, and she gasped. It's been so long. She breathed, her voice catching on a sob. She turned to face me, her eyes wide and wet and full of a terrifying, beautiful need. In that moment, the label of mother-in-law was burned away. She was Eleanor, a woman, and my carefully constructed world of logic and reason collapsed into dust. Her thin shoulders trembled under my hands. As our lips drew near, our breath was hotter than the water, thicker than the steam. Don't tell anyone, she whispered, the same words from the first night, but now they were not a request. They were a vow, an incantation, the seal on a pact from which there was no escape. When our lips met, the world turned upside down. Her fingers dug into my back, anchoring herself to me. The bathroom, which should have been a quiet, sterile space, was filled with the heavy, ragged sounds of two people who had been starving for a connection they didn't know how to name. It's okay, I rasped, my voice unrecognizable. I locked the door. Every word, every touch seemed only to fuel the fire. I don't know how much time passed. Time had lost all meaning, collapsing into this one singular, universe-altering moment. Finally, as our breathing began to slow, she rested her forehead against my chest, her body still trembling. This is a sin, she said, her voice muffled against my skin. Yes, I answered, but I can't stop. I just held her, the only sound the steady, rhythmic dripping of water from the faucet onto the tile floor. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I could feel her presence through the wall, a silent, charged, wakeful stillness. The warmth of her skin was imprinted on my hands, a phantom sensation I knew would never leave me. The next morning at the breakfast table, a new, dangerous intimacy had settled between us. It was in the shared secret smiles, in the way her eyes lingered on mine. Can you help me again tonight? She asked, and my heart began its frantic, treacherous pounding all over again. We couldn't go back. The forbidden nights we could tell no one about would continue. But then, one afternoon, the fragile, glass blown world we had built for ourselves was threatened by a single, simple sound. The doorbell rang. My blood ran cold. Eleanor froze, a plate halfway to the cupboard. Mark! She breathed. When I opened the door, her son was standing there, a cheerful, oblivious smile on his face. Hey, Arthur, he said. Just thought I'd stop by and see how Mom's doing. Eleanor came out from the kitchen, her own smile a little too bright, a little too brittle. Mark, what a lovely surprise. Hey, Mom, he said, enveloping her in a hug. He held her at arm's length, studying her. You're looking well, got some color in your cheeks. He looked from me to his mother and back again, a curious glint in his eye. He's taking good care of you. We take care of each other, Eleanor said quickly, her voice a little too high. Throughout his visit, an undercurrent of tension filled the air. Every time Eleanor and I glanced at each other, I felt Mark's eyes on us. He was a detective in his own home, searching for clues to a crime he didn't even know had been committed. He stayed for dinner, and the silence around the table was heavy and suffocating. I could feel his suspicion like a change in the barometric pressure, a storm gathering just off the coast. After he finally left, Eleanor was visibly shaken. He knows, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I think he knows something's wrong. It's okay, I tried to reassure her, though my own heart was pounding. He doesn't know anything. I'll protect you. But that night, when the lock on the bathroom door clicked, it sounded like a desperate final act of defiance. Deeper, she pleaded, her voice frantic, desperate. Make me forget. We clung to each other as if the outside world was a raging storm we could somehow keep at bay. The steam was our shield, our breaths a shared prayer. If he finds out, she sobbed against my shoulder, we'll lose everything. Don't think about it, I whispered into her hair. It's just us now. Only us. But in that moment, at the very peak of our desperate, forbidden passion, we heard it. A sound that cut through the steam, through our ragged breaths, through the pounding of our hearts. Footsteps in the hall. My entire body went rigid. Eleanor let out a small, terrified gasp. I clamped my hand over her mouth, my own panic a cold, hard knot in my stomach. A low voice came from just outside the door. Mom, are you in there? Are you okay? It was Mark. He had come back. We held our breath, frozen in a tableau of guilt and terror. The steam suddenly felt cold on our skin. The thin wooden door was the only thing separating our secret from total, catastrophic ruin. We could hear him shifting his weight outside. The sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears like a freight train. If he heard it, if he heard anything, it was all over. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then finally, after a silence that stretched for an age, we heard his footsteps retreating and the soft, final sound of the front door closing. The immediate danger had passed. Eleanor sagged against me, shaking uncontrollably. It's okay, I said, though my own voice was a trembling whisper.